What happens when America's brightest morning smile collides with a woman who has spent the last 5 years fighting the world on her own terms? On a crisp Tuesday morning in Manhattan, just as the first golden strands of sunlight slid between the glass towers of the Upper West Side, the studio of Live with Kelly and Mark hummed with its usual ritual of controlled chaos. Stagehands adjusted light rigs that glowed warm and flattering. Makeup artists made final dabs of powder. The band rehearsed a cheerful riff that would soon burst into living rooms across the country like liquid caffeine. The temperature inside the studio was slightly cool, designed to counteract the heat of the lights. The audience, bundled in sweaters and anticipation, whispered excitedly as they found their seats. For many of them, this wasn't just a taping. It was a pilgrimage. They had come to see the woman who had become synonymous with morning warmth, the woman whose laughter had floated through kitchens for over 2 decades. Kelly Ripa stood just off stage, her posture relaxed but alert, the way it always was before the countdown. 20-plus years of live television had trained her nerves into something almost superhuman. She had interviewed presidents, movie stars, best-selling authors, and even members of royalty. She knew how to disarm egos with charm. She knew how to soothe tension with humor. She knew how to pivot when things went sideways. But today, something felt different. Across the stage, Mark Consuelos adjusted his cufflinks and leaned toward her. "You good?" he asked softly, reading the faint crease between her brows. "I'm always good," Kelly replied with a small smile. But even as she said it, her producer's voice echoed faintly in her earpiece. "Be mindful. Sensitive topics. Stay light if you can." The guest that morning was no ordinary celebrity. She was a duchess, a former actress, a global headline generator. A woman whose every breath had been dissected by tabloids on 2 continents. The band struck its opening chord. The applause sign flashed. The audience erupted into cheers as Kelly and Mark danced their way onto the stage, all polished energy and practiced joy. The cameras glided in, capturing wide shots of waving hands and bright smiles. For the first 20 minutes, everything unfolded exactly as it always did. A playful cooking segment filled the air with the smell of rosemary and garlic. A viral video of a toddler chasing pigeons sent laughter rippling across the studio. Kelly's laugh rang out, genuine and contagious. Mark cracked a joke about burning toast. The world, for that brief window of time, felt uncomplicated. Then Kelly glanced down at her cue card. "All right, everyone," she said, her voice rising with theatrical excitement. "Our next guest is someone who has captivated the world. She's a philanthropist, a producer, a duchess, and one of the most talked about women on the planet. Please welcome." The doors opened. Meghan Markle stepped into the light. She wore a cream-colored ensemble so impeccably tailored it seemed sculpted rather than sewn. The fabric caught the studio lights and shimmered subtly, expensive but understated. Her smile was wide, calculated, flawless. The applause swelled. But if you looked closely, really closely, you might have noticed something in her eyes. Not nervousness. Not excitement. Something cooler. Measured. She crossed the stage with deliberate grace. Kelly rose immediately, arms open. The embrace was brief but warm. Mark offered a handshake and an easy grin. Meghan settled into her chair, legs crossed, posture straight as a marble column. "Thank you for being here," Kelly began, leaning forward slightly, hands resting comfortably in her lap. "We're so excited." "Thank you for having me," Meghan replied. Her voice was smooth, almost musical. But beneath it was a faint flatness. A tone that didn't quite match the sparkle of her smile. The audience, unaware of any undercurrent, leaned in eagerly. Kelly began gently. "You've been incredibly busy, new projects, new initiatives, life in Montecito with Harry and the kids. How do you balance it all?" Meghan tilted her head, a subtle movement that shifted the energy almost imperceptibly. "Balance," she said slowly, "is really about priorities, isn't it? When you know what truly matters, everything else falls into place. I've always had that clarity. A beat. Not everyone does. The sentence landed softly, but it landed. Kelly's smile didn't falter. Decades of live television had trained her muscles to hold steady through earthquakes. But her eyes flickered for half a second. That's a great perspective, she replied smoothly. I think a lot of working moms struggle with that clarity. Any advice? Meghan gave a light laugh. It didn't reach her eyes. Advice? What works for someone in my position wouldn't necessarily translate to someone in, well, a different situation. It's not really comparable. A few audience members shifted in their seats. The air seemed to cool further. Mark jumped in with practiced timing. Speaking of your position, the work your foundation is doing has been getting a lot of attention. Tell us about that. Meghan's posture straightened even more. We're addressing issues that actually matter, she said. Mental health. Women's empowerment. Children's welfare. Substantive work. The kind that doesn't always make headlines but changes lives. Kelly nodded. That's wonderful. Is there a specific program you're especially proud of? For the first time, Meghan's eyes narrowed. Just slightly. I'm proud of all of it, she said evenly. Asking me to single out one thing is like asking a mother to choose her favorite child. The metaphor hung in the air. Of course, Kelly replied quickly. I just thought our viewers would love to hear an example. Our viewers, Meghan repeated, the emphasis subtle but unmistakable. If they want specifics, they can visit our website. I'm not here to deliver a sales pitch. The word sales landed heavily. Kelly felt something stir inside her, a warning bell. But she pressed on, redirecting with grace. We're grateful you're here. And I know you get this question a lot, but how are Harry and the kids? A shift. A tightening. They're fine, Meghan said. But I prefer not to discuss my family in detail. Kelly nodded. Absolutely. I respect that. General terms, Meghan continued, have a way of becoming specific headlines. The audience quieted. The laughter that usually bounced off the studio walls had dissolved into a cautious stillness. Mark leaned forward. Kelly and I have 3 kids ourselves. We get being protective. With respect, Meghan replied coolly, turning toward him, your situation isn't quite the same. Your children aren't 6th and 7th in line to the British throne. A faint murmur rippled through the crowd. Kelly inhaled slowly, feeling the tension coiling like invisible wire around the set. She decided to pivot again. Something light. Something safe. You've been spotted at some great restaurants in LA, she offered with a friendly grin. Any favorites? Meghan blinked. Slowly. I don't really think about food in terms of favorites, she said. I think about nutrition. Sustainability. Ethics. Recommending restaurants feels superficial. There it was. The word hovered like a faint accusation over everything Kelly had built for 20 years, joy, connection, warmth. The band members shifted awkwardly. In their seats. The audience no longer knew when to clap. The bright studio lights felt harsher now, exposing every flicker of emotion on every face. Kelly's smile remained, but something in her eyes had changed. For the first time that morning, America's sweetheart of morning television looked not just surprised, but challenged. And as Meghan crossed one leg over the other, adjusting her cuff with careful precision, it became clear that this wasn't going to be a friendly exchange. It was going to be a test. And in just a few moments, one carefully worded question would push the conversation past the point of recovery. But no one in that studio, not the audience, not the producers, not even Kelly herself, was ready for how quickly the warmth would evaporate, or for who would finally break first. If you think this was tense, you haven't seen anything yet. There's a moment in every live broadcast when the energy shifts so subtly that only seasoned professionals feel it. It isn't loud. It isn't obvious. It's a tightening of air. A stillness between breaths. And inside the studio of Live with Kelly and Mark, that moment had just arrived. The applause had died down. The band, usually quick to fill silence with a playful chord, remained unusually quiet. Even the overhead lights seemed harsher now, casting sharper shadows across polished floors and carefully curated smiles. Kelly Ripa felt it first. The slight tremor beneath the surface. For over 2 decades, she had mastered the delicate art of live conversation. She knew when a guest needed space. When to pivot. When to lighten. When to challenge. But this was different. It wasn't awkwardness. It wasn't nerves. It was resistance. Across from her, Meghan Markle sat poised and immaculate, but something in her posture had shifted. Her back remained straight, her hands elegantly folded, but her chin had lifted a fraction higher. The warmth she had performed on entrance had thinned, replaced with something colder. Kelly decided to steady the ship. "You mentioned systemic change," she said gently, her tone calm but curious. "That's a powerful phrase. For viewers watching at home, what does that look like in practical terms?" It was a fair question. It was also the wrong one. Meghan's eyes sharpened. "Practical terms," she repeated slowly. "It looks like dismantling structures that have marginalized voices for centuries. It looks like holding institutions accountable. It looks like refusing to participate in systems that profit from harm." The words were polished. Rehearsed. But there was an edge now, an almost combative rhythm in her delivery. Kelly nodded thoughtfully. "And how do you balance that mission with appearing on platforms like this?" The air snapped. A visible pause. Mark shifted slightly in his chair. Somewhere in the control room, a producer leaned closer to the monitor. "Platforms like this?" Meghan echoed, her tone dipping colder. "I just mean," Kelly clarified smoothly, "morning talk shows are often lighter in tone. Fun. Relatable. Do you ever feel tension between activism and entertainment?" It was a nuanced question. A fair one. But Meghan leaned forward slowly, her fingers tightening around the edge of her chair. "I think that's a false dichotomy," she said. "The idea that substance and entertainment can't coexist is part of the problem. Maybe if more shows were willing to prioritize meaningful dialogue over cooking segments and celebrity gossip, we'd see more real change." The comment landed heavy. In the front row, a woman who had laughed earlier now pressed her lips together. Kelly's smile stayed intact, but her eyes no longer danced. "Well," she said carefully, "we try to create space for both. Joy matters. People at home are dealing with enough heaviness already. And why do you assume they can't handle more?" Meghan shot back. "Why does morning television have to be diluted?" There it was. The first direct hit. Kelly felt the words like a physical tap against her ribs. Not devastating, but deliberate. "I don't assume that at all," Kelly replied, voice steady. "But connection sometimes begins with simplicity. That doesn't make it shallow." Meghan's lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. "Sometimes simplicity is just avoidance," she said quietly. The temperature in the studio seemed to drop another degree. Mark leaned forward again, attempting rescue. "We've actually had some pretty serious conversations on this show over the years," he offered lightly. "Mental health, grief, social justice." Meghan glanced at him briefly, then back to Kelly. "And how often do those segments get clipped and turned into memes? How often are they sandwiched between product promotions?" A beat. Kelly's fingers interlocked in her lap. A subtle grounding gesture. "We operate within a format," she replied. "But that doesn't invalidate the conversations." Meghan's jaw tightened. "Format is a choice. Silence. In the control room, someone whispered, "This is going sideways." Kelly inhaled slowly. She had been patient. Respectful. But now she sensed the pattern, every question reframed as accusation, every attempt at warmth interpreted as condescension. She tried one last pivot. "You've spoken before about media narratives," Kelly said softly. "Do you think sometimes those narratives are influenced by how interviews unfold?" It was a subtle invitation. A bridge. But Meghan heard challenge. "Are you suggesting I control narratives?" she asked sharply. "I'm asking whether you feel misunderstood," Kelly clarified. "I feel scrutinized," Meghan corrected. "Constantly. And sometimes that scrutiny comes disguised as curiosity." The words were pointed. Directed. Kelly's pulse quickened, but her voice remained level. "Curiosity is my job. And defensiveness is mine," Meghan replied without hesitation. The bluntness stunned the room. Mark blinked. The audience exchanged uneasy glances. The rhythm of the show, the familiar rise and fall of friendly banter, had fractured completely. Kelly leaned back slightly, studying her guest. For the first time, she wasn't hosting. She was assessing. "Meghan," she said carefully, "have I done something in this conversation that feels unfair?" A direct question. Honest. Meghan held her gaze. "Yes," she said. A collective intake of breath. Kelly felt heat rise in her chest, not anger yet, but incredulity. "Help me understand that. You keep framing things in ways that minimize the seriousness of what I'm doing," Meghan said. "You reduce systemic issues to lifestyle choices. You pivot to restaurants and balance. It feels dismissive." Kelly nodded slowly. "That wasn't my intention." "Intent and impact aren't the same," Meghan replied instantly. The phrase hung in the air like a courtroom verdict. Kelly's jaw tightened slightly. She recognized the rhetorical move. "I agree," she said. "Which is why I'm asking you directly what feels off. I want this to be a conversation." Meghan tilted her head again, that subtle gesture from earlier, now sharper. "A conversation requires equality. I don't feel equal here." The statement stunned even Mark. "Equal how?" Kelly asked quietly. "In power," Meghan said. "In narrative control. In framing." Kelly blinked. "It's my show." There it was. Not defensive. Just factual. The audience shifted again, tension now palpable enough to taste. "And that's exactly the point," Meghan replied. "You hold the power here." Kelly leaned forward slightly, her voice still calm but firmer now. "Power isn't the same as hostility. I haven't attacked you. I haven't misquoted you. I've asked questions. That's not oppression." The word landed heavier than she intended. Meghan's expression hardened immediately. "I didn't say oppression. You implied imbalance. And there is imbalance." Mark cleared his throat softly. "Okay, let's all breathe for a second." But neither woman looked at him. The air between them had crystallized. Kelly's patience, legendary, unshakable, was thinning. Not because of disagreement. But because of accusation. "You know what?" Kelly said quietly. "I treat every guest with the same tone. The same warmth. The same curiosity. I don't change my approach based on titles." "Maybe you should," Meghan replied coolly. The words hit like a slap. A ripple of shock moved through the audience. Kelly stared at her for a long beat. "Why?" she asked. "Because not every guest carries the same weight," Meghan said. "Some of us represent more than ourselves." Kelly felt something click inside her, a realization. This wasn't about questions. This was about deference. And she didn't do deference. Not to presidents. Not to royalty. Not to anyone. Her voice remained calm, but it had steel now. I respect what you represent, Kelly said evenly. But I don't bow to it. The sentence hung suspended in the studio air. Meghan's eyes flashed. For a split second, something unfiltered surfaced: shock, anger, disbelief. And then the walls snapped up higher than before. Mark shifted again, tension crawling visibly up his neck. The producer's voice crackled frantically in his earpiece. The audience sat frozen, watching something they had never seen on this stage before. Not playful tension. Not awkwardness. But collision. Two women who refused to yield. And just as Meghan's fingers curled tightly around the armrest, just as Kelly inhaled to speak again, Meghan's chair scraped against the floor. A sharp, unmistakable sound. She stood. And in that single movement, the interview crossed a line from uncomfortable to explosive. What she said next would echo far beyond that studio. And what Kelly chose to say in response would define the moment forever. What happens when live television stops being performance, and becomes truth? The sound of Meghan's chair scraping against the polished studio floor sliced through the air like glass. It wasn't loud, but in the suffocating silence that had fallen over the set of Live with Kelly and Mark, it felt thunderous. Every camera adjusted instinctively. A wide shot pulled back. A close-up zoomed in. The red tally lights glowed steadily, unblinking, indifferent. This was live. There would be no edits. Meghan Markle stood tall, shoulders squared, chin lifted just slightly too high. Her cream-colored outfit, pristine and composed, now felt almost armor-like under the studio lights. Her breathing had changed, subtle but visible. Controlled. Measured. Across from her, Kelly Ripa remained seated for half a second longer. Not frozen. Thinking. In 20-plus years of live broadcasting, Kelly had dealt with awkward jokes, emotional breakdowns, controversial comments. But this was something else. This was confrontation without humor, tension without release. Then Kelly stood. Slowly. Calmly. The audience didn't move. No coughs. No whispers. Even the band remained motionless, instruments resting silently in their laps. I don't have to sit here and be insulted, Meghan said, her voice tight but steady. Kelly's expression didn't change. You haven't been insulted, she replied, her tone even. You've been asked questions. Questions with implications, Meghan shot back. Questions that undermine the seriousness of my work. Kelly inhaled carefully. You could almost see the discipline in the way she chose her next words. Every guest who sits in that chair gets questions, she said. Some light. Some serious. That's the format. It's not personal. It feels personal, Meghan insisted. A beat. Kelly tilted her head slightly, not mockingly, but thoughtfully. Is it possible, she said gently, that it feels personal because you expected something different? The words were soft. But they landed hard. Meghan's eyes flashed. I expected respect. And you received it. No, Meghan replied sharply. What I received was condescension disguised as charm. A murmur rippled through the audience, barely audible, but present. Kelly's composure flickered for the first time, not into anger, but into something deeper. Disappointment. I've treated you exactly the way I treat everyone, she said. With curiosity. With warmth. With openness. With triviality, Meghan countered. Restaurants. Balance. Lifestyle questions. I represent systemic issues. You reduce it to small talk. Kelly felt the sting, but this time, she didn't swallow it. You came on to a morning show, she replied calmly. A show watched by parents making school lunches. By nurses finishing night shifts. By people who need a moment of light before heading into heavy days. That's not trivial. That's human. The word hung there. Human. Meghan's posture stiffened. And you assume I'm not human? I assume you are, Kelly answered immediately. Which is why I expected you to engage like one. There it was. The line. The studio lights felt hotter now. Sweat beaded faintly along Meghan's hairline, though her expression remained sharp. You think I haven't engaged? She asked, incredulous. I think, Kelly said carefully, that every question has been met with defense instead of dialogue. Mark shifted beside them, tension visible in the tightness of his jaw. He glanced toward the control room cameras, then back to the two women locked in stillness. I came here in good faith, Meghan said, her voice rising slightly. And I was immediately treated like a stereotype. What stereotype? Kelly asked, genuinely confused. The difficult one, Meghan replied. Kelly blinked. No one called you difficult. You didn't have to. The implication lingered like smoke. Kelly's shoulders relaxed slightly, not in surrender, but in clarity. She had reached the end of the maze. Every path circled back to accusation. Meghan, she said quietly, I've spent over 20 years building this platform. I've interviewed world leaders, artists, activists. I don't change my tone based on titles or public narratives. If you wanted something different from this space, you could have asked for it before we went live. You're suggesting this is my fault. I'm suggesting expectations matter. The precision of her words cut clean. Meghan grabbed her purse from beside her chair, the movement abrupt and sharp. The audience flinched collectively at the suddenness. This was a mistake, she said coldly. Coming here was a mistake. Kelly didn't move. Why? Because this environment is toxic. The word echoed. Toxic. Kelly's eyes narrowed just slightly, not in anger, but disbelief. Toxic, she repeated calmly. For asking you to clarify your work. For trying to keep the tone balanced. For challenging me in ways you don't challenge others. Kelly's brow furrowed. That's not true. It is. Silence. Then Kelly said something that shifted everything. You're not upset about the questions, she said softly. You're upset that they weren't rehearsed. The air cracked. Meghan's breath caught, just barely. A microsecond of exposure before the composure returned. I don't need rehearsed questions, she said through clenched calm. Then why does this feel like control slipping? Kelly asked. The audience gasped. Not loudly, but audibly. Mark's eyes widened. The producer's voice in his earpiece went frantic. Meghan stared at Kelly as if seeing her for the first time, not as a smiling host, but as an opponent. You don't know me, she said, her voice trembling faintly now. No, Kelly agreed. I don't. But I know. This moment. A pause. And this moment doesn't look like empowerment. It looks like defensiveness. The words didn't shout. They didn't accuse. They simply sat there, calm and devastating. For a flicker of time, something passed across Meghan's face. Not rage. Not superiority. Something more vulnerable. Recognition, perhaps. But it vanished almost instantly. You'll hear from my team, she said icily. Kelly nodded once. Our footage is available anytime. Meghan turned and walked toward the exit, heels striking sharply against the floor. The studio doors opened, then closed behind her with a soft but final click. Silence swallowed the room. Mark exhaled slowly. Did that really just happen? Kelly stood still for a moment, staring at the empty doorway. Then she sank back into her chair, the adrenaline draining from her posture. Her hands trembled slightly now that the moment had passed. Yeah, she said quietly. It did. The show cut to commercial. In the brief darkness between segments, crew members rushed in. A producer crouched beside Kelly. "Are you okay?" Kelly nodded, though her voice was softer now. "I'm fine. I didn't expect that." When the red light blinked back on, she faced the camera directly. No script. No teleprompter. Just truth. "Well," she began, offering a small, composed smile that was unexpected. A nervous laugh rippled through the audience. "I want to say this," she continued. "We aim to create a space that's welcoming and respectful. We ask questions because our viewers deserve clarity. And sometimes conversations don't go the way we hope. But honesty matters." Mark nodded beside her. "We're going to move forward," Kelly said gently. "That's what live television is about." The band struck a tentative chord. The next segment began. The rhythm slowly returned. But something had shifted. Not just in that studio. Online, clips of the exchange would spread within hours. Some would say Kelly had crossed a line. Others would praise her for refusing to bow. Debate would ignite across social media, opinion columns, and talk shows. But inside that Manhattan studio, in that singular, unedited moment, something rare had happened. The performance had stopped. And two powerful women had collided without filters. No script. No safety net. Just raw, uncomfortable authenticity. And maybe that was the real story, not who won, not who walked out, but what happens when expectation meets resistance in the unforgiving light of live television. Now we want to hear from you. Was Kelly right to stand her ground? Did Meghan have legitimate concerns? Or did ego eclipse empathy on both sides? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you felt the tension, if you lived that moment with us, make sure you like this video, subscribe for more deep dives into the most explosive moments in television history, and share this story with someone who believes live TV is always predictable. Because sometimes the most unforgettable moments aren't scripted at all.